here to talk about when your business model and your business gets completely changed, obviously because of COVID and what's happened to Meetup. And many of us have, as community managers and as entrepreneurs, our work lives and our personal lives have gotten completely upended and changed. And we're looking to share 8 specific principles on things that you can do to make sure that you could learn and grow and make this experience as great as possible. And that's what we're going to be doing here today. So before I get started, I just want to make sure, for those of you who do not know the Meetup founder story, we were founded right after September 11th, 2001, close to 19 years, actually about a little over 19 years ago. What happened was, there was obviously this pain that people were going through, and the trauma of 9/11, particularly in New York City, but acute throughout the country and throughout the world. And people felt they needed community. And at some point, our founder, Scott Heiferman, said, it shouldn't take a tragedy to get people together. And he started building relationships with all these people and realized, why can't there be a business and a product and an experience to build relationships not having to do a tragedy? And that was when Meetup was born. Meetup today has 52 million members worldwide. We have 15,000 Meetup events every single day in 10,000 different cities and 190 plus countries around the world. Almost every single country besides probably North Korea. And it's probably gonna be a while until we get that one. There's been a lot of change in Meetup. We were owned by WeWork, and in March, an interesting month to be sold due to the pandemic, Meetup was sold out of WeWork. And at the same time, the exact same time, the coronavirus was rearing its horribly ugly head, and we had this dual effect of a need to pivot, because we're all about getting together in person. And we started seeing all of our key metrics just kind of fall off a cliff. Our RSVPs went down significantly, as you can see in March, and then in April again. Meaning the number of people who attend Meetup events. The number of events that were hosted was going down also precipitously. The number of people who were joining as new organizers went down also significantly. And we feared for Meetup's future. But then we made a major pivot. And we made a pivot to focus on online. Since that pivot, in our first 18 years, we had virtually no online events. In the last 6 months, we have had 1.2 million online events at Meetup, because we realized it's not about in person, it's about keeping connected. And our job at Meetup is to keep people connected to each other, to build community for each other, just like you all do every single day. We've had 9 million plus people attending Meetup events across 190 different countries, all both online and in person, but this is just the online numbers over the last several months. So what I want to do right now is share with you 8 pivoting principles, things that you could take tangible ways for you to pivot your businesses. And here we go. Number 8, when you are pivoting, the whole idea of a pivot, let's say in basketball, is that your heel's on the ground and you're moving your feet. But the key is there's something implanted that's on the ground. There's something that's immobile. There's something that you're not going to change. That's an anchor. And for us, that's our mission and our vision and our values. Our mission around empowering personal growth through real human connections and having a world where people turn to each other to improve their lives, that can't change. That can't change in a pivot. And our values, and we have a number of values that are on the screen, I'm not going to read them to you, around transparency, around integrity, around elevating people, focusing on impact. That can't change either. The reason why it can't change is because we did a study with an independent third party, University of Pennsylvania, and they found that Meetup members, 90% of them increase their knowledge, and 80+% feel more connected to others. Close to 80% are more confident, and close to 90% feel that if you're an organizer, you're positively impacting the lives of others. That when we looked at Meetup versus Facebook, people feel like Meetup makes your life better. And on the right-hand side, the more meetups that Meetup events that you RSVP to, the happier you actually end up being. Which is like this amazing found study that is particularly important in light of what's happening in the world today. So number 8 is all about not pivoting your mission and your values and keeping that sacrosanct. Now let's talk about number 7. Number 7 principle around pivoting your business model when needed, in our case to online, is, and obviously we're both online and in person, by the way. We are probably really 50% online right now and 50% in person, and the in-person keeps growing as different locations became more flexible to be able to be there. So the number 7 is make sure you're supporting your pivot with a lot of communications and best practices. So for example, we run a weekly online webinar where we coach our organizers on how to make online meetups more effective. And we'll show you more about that. We have workshops for organizers. We have a blog to tens of thousands of organizers to help them and provide leadership around organizing and online. Created private meetup groups. We're starting a mentoring program for organizers. It's key. If you're going to pivot, it's not about taking the action. It's about making sure you're supporting that pivot. So here's an example of a template that we sent out to anyone who had an online discussion group and said, here's some of the things you need to have in your agenda. Here's some of the things your attendees are going to need as part of sharing best practices. And then we sent it out to all meditation groups and yoga groups and book clubs and groups that focus on photo sharing. And we shared ideal advice on the length of an event, because an event needs to be different, of course, if it's an online event versus an in-person event. There's a lot of best practices that are important to share, and we're going to show you some of those best practices shortly. We created something called Meetup Live, where we're sharing best practices with meetup groups around marketing, dealing with mental health, etc. And as I mentioned, if anyone wants to join the blog, meetup.com/blog, then you could learn best practices around community management. Janine, feel free to share this on the chat for people when I go to the next slide if they want to join our blog. And then we spoke at a significant number of meetup events to help really people to support the online temporary, obviously, pivot. Though online is going to be here to stay, we expect to have the vast majority of meetup events post-COVID to be back in person again. So number 8 principle is around keeping your mission and values. Number 7 is around supporting with best practices and communications. Number 6 is make sure you pivot based on what's happening in your ecosystem, in your community. And here's an example of that. So one of the things we've been pivoting and leaning even further into is our racial equality. And we started seeing after the death of George Floyd, an enormous number of meetup groups that started in Las Vegas and in Dallas and in Orlando and in Knoxville, June 1st, June 2nd, June 3rd. And we said, how can we understand this user behavior and support this pivot? And we said, we are going to make Meetup free for anyone who wants to organize a group focused on racial equality. And we now have 24 groups and over 5,000 members. And on the right-hand side, you can see some examples of groups that have started. And it's free to be an organizer forever if you're focused on racial equality. It's something that is about pivoting based on user behavior. And we're now focused, of course, like many organizations, on getting the vote out. And we have banners throughout and through our site and through our apps to be able to do that. Again, we have many different communications to help to really dismantle social injustice. And we have significant communications, all because the focus of a pivot needs to be around understanding user behavior and understanding what your people need. And this is what people need right now. And we've been incredibly focused on that. Now let's go to number 5 principle. The 5th principle that I want you to take away is when you pivot, make sure to figure out how to minimize your risk. Minimize the risk of the pivot. And I'll just show you a couple of things that we did. So for in-person events, which we still have, and in certain countries like Australia, they might be 80 to 90% of the events might be in person. Other countries like Brazil might be 0. And it really depends on the country. We're going to show you a heat map about that actually shortly. But minimize the risk of in-person events and really coaching organizers on what to do around masks and social distancing and limiting attendees, hand washing, and also really sharing best practices, like I alluded to earlier, on online events. So for example, it's so important for someone who's gonna have an online event to take advantage of breakout groups, to have a real engagement with an audience, to have scavenger hunts as part of it, to really engage people, to figure out how to make sure you're being super clear on what the expectations are, what the learning is going to be, what the timing of the event is, how to use chat, whether it's chat games or ways of introducing people to one another. Sometimes in an online meetup event, you need to assign very specific roles to people that you wouldn't have those roles in an in-person event. A timekeeper, making sure no one dominates the conversation, monitoring chat. We're just sharing a lot of these areas to minimize risk is very, very important in a pivot. Number 4 is focus on what you do special and unique, what we call your unique value proposition, your UVP. And for us, we have 2 areas that we are really special in. One is outdoor. So as you can see, when it comes to outdoor, there's a lot less risk than obviously indoor groups. And we're encouraging groups to figure out how to be outside, how to socially distance outside, how to go on hikes, how to do things, how to go on bike rides, how to go kayaking, and do those things that can be great and keep the community alive. And then of course, our big UVP, unique value proposition, is around tech and really helping people to think about how they can instill their tech groups to still be as meaningful as they were when they were meeting in person. So pivot around your unique value proposition is number 4. Now let's go to number 3. When you're pivoting, yes, you need to focus on your present. Very important to focus on the present situation. And it's a tough situation. It's very easy to get only focused on the present, not focus on your future. What we said is no, our future is Gen Z. In fact, the loneliness epidemic is real. Among those who are Gen Z, 62% of Gen Zers regularly feel lonely. Terrifying statistic. So we said, what can Meetup do during this time? Well, again, we made Meetup free for people with a .edu. And part of and now we've had over 67,000 college students mostly and grad students attending Meetup events by these 400 plus groups that college students have created. And it's contributing meaningful growth to Meetup, and some are happening online and some are happening on college campuses, safe and in person. We're giving a meaningful amount of money to charity, to global giving, to support coronavirus relief. And over time, in different countries, we're encouraging them, depending on what's safe and around that country, to figure out how to get back together, but only when it's safe to do so. Number 2, when you're doing your pivot, make sure you're really leveraging data as part of your pivot. So here's an example of some data that I thought everyone might find interesting. This is the percentage of events around the world that are in person. So as I mentioned before, Australia has a high percentage of events in person. China, same thing. South America, very much not so. Russia has a little bit higher percentage in person, and apparently Saudi Arabia and Iraq also have higher percentages in person. Hong Kong, same sort of situation. And then this is which countries are increasing the number of events in person. Russia is one of them. And you can see some countries are actually pulling back from their in-person events. Now let's look at the United States. Certain states have a much higher percentage of in-person. So for example, New Hampshire, Idaho, Tennessee, higher percentages in person, and the others like Washington State and San Diego and South Dakota, much lower percentages. And then certain states are increasingly growing their in-person, and certain states, because of COVID, are decreasing. So Maine, for example, had a high percentage in person. There's unfortunately been a bigger uptick in the state of Maine, and now they're declining the number of meetup groups in person. It's kind of interesting to see kind of these leading kind of indicators around what's happening in the world. But the key message is leverage data to direct your pivot. Number 1, is as you're pivoting, make sure that you're constantly exploring new customers, new revenue sources. And for us, we have a B2B business where we have many clients, as you could see, that are in that B2B business, thousands of clients really in that B2B business that use a product called Pro, and we're getting much more, we're adding significant numbers of features to that business. The ability to get the email addresses for anyone who is a participant in the community, and a whole lot of other features. And what we do is we help to identify groups that a company could be interested in. We engage those groups, we communicate with those groups, and then a sponsor, whether it's Google or any other tech company, can then get access to those individuals. And it's been a real growing area for Meetup. And the key message there is, in part of your pivot, make sure you're finding new customers and revenue sources. So what happened? Well, this is actual data, confidential. Please don't share it. The recovery is real. So in blue is the online Meetup events. And you can see in April, let's say, previous to May, there was a lot of blue. There's still a lot of blue, but IRL is coming back. And if it wasn't for, our total number of Meetup events are continuing to grow and continuing to increase, thank you God, in terms of number of people attending events, those are RSVPs, the number of events. And you can see that this pivot is actually really working, because community is even more important during COVID. And it's also important once we get out. And we're seeing a real recovery in terms of last month versus this month, and what's happening there. In terms of pivoting, I would be remiss not to mention two amazing books that you should all read. One is A Lean Startup, which has a chapter on pivoting, and one is called Running Lean. If you haven't read Lean Startup, please do, and same thing with Running Lean. And just to remind everyone around the 8 principles that we talked about. Never change your mission and values. Support online pivots with best practices. Learn to pivot from user behavior, like we did with Black Lives Matter. Pivot, make sure you're minimizing risk, make sure you're pivoting around your unique value proposition. Make sure you're doubling down for your future. Make sure you're leveraging data, and make sure you're finding new customers and revenue sources as part of your pivot. So without further ado, here's my email. Email me. Happy to answer your email. And if you want to learn more about Pro, I'm going to download our app, but if you want to learn more about Pro, just go meetup.com/pro, and that's an opportunity to have your community groups sponsored. So now I just want to really open it up to everyone to ask any questions. We have another 5 or so minutes, and I could put back the principles to pivoting. If you have any questions at all, please ask them in the chat, and a colleague of mine is going to be sharing those messages with me as well. So please do not hesitate to do so.
Yes. Thank you, David. That was a wonderful presentation of yours. And truly, our attendees are getting the benefit from this. You did a great job in sharing your 8 principles in pivoting your business. I can see here one question from Kate. Her question is, how are you including the folks who aren't able to attend college in your future plans?
Really important question. So I actually have a 19-year-old, and he was supposed to be in college this year, and he's actually starting college in another country and doing it remotely, and it's a very difficult situation. You know what? If it's what we're using right now is a .edu as a proxy, but many students who are not in college, and they could be high school students, also have a .edu email address. And if they're not yet starting college yet, and we know how important community is, particularly around 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, when it's just pivotal to their personal developments, become a Meetup organizer, use your .edu email address, and or encourage others to do so, and it will be free to be able to be an organizer. But it's one of the most important things to us is to help people that are millennials and Gen Z through this really incredibly difficult time. And we know and we actually have a partnership with another interesting social media company called Zinfluence. Zinfluence, if you want to look them up, Zinfluence, Zinfluence. And it's a bunch of very big influential people on social media who are blogging and sharing information about that. It's free to organize on Meetup with a .edu. Take advantage of it. We literally don't get a single dollar for it. All we want to do is help people in that very important demographic of, late teen, early 20 age. So Kate, thank you for asking me that question. Any other questions?
Well, thank you for your answer, David. We got no questions so far, and we're on time. So if you have questions for David, just connect with him on his email address. And thank you, David, for your time for today, coming to
Absolutely.
Summit 2020. And hopefully, if you can stay and meet with other attendees as well, and for some questions if they want to ask you through the direct messages. There is a direct messages here.
Great. I'm in my direct message now, and you should feel free to direct message me or send me a chat, and we'll go from there. Take care, everyone.
All right, thank you, David.